Have you ever been asked to pay for a debt that wasn't yours, one signed by a parent, long gone, in a moment of desperation? What would you do if the price wasn't money, but your life? Clara Thompson was a quiet art teacher in a sleepy Vermont town, still grieving her father when a man in a tailored suit arrived at her door with a contract older than her adult life. Her father's debt had come due, and the collateral was her no courtroom, no arguments, just a signature that changed everything overnight. Clara was sent to live with Elias Kingsley, a man whose heart was as sealed as the mansion he kept locked tight behind stone walls and silence. He didn't ask for her love. He only demanded her presence. But life rarely follows the terms we write on paper. What would you choose, duty or freedom? Silence or a chance at something real? This is a story about contracts that turn into vows and hearts that find their way home in the most unexpected places. If this story touches you, leave a like so we know you're listening. It was a Wednesday morning in early April, the kind of morning when the sun filtered through half-drawn curtains and the air smelled faintly of toast and spring. Clara Thompson stood by the window of her modest kitchen, cradling a cup of black coffee in both hands. Outside, her mother, Ruth, was tending to the daffodils along the front fence. It was peaceful in that small town in Vermont, too peaceful to know that life was about to shift like plates beneath the earth. The knock on the door was firm, too purposeful to be the neighbor boy selling cookies again. Ruth stood up, brushed dirt from her apron, and walked toward the door. Clara watched from inside, a slight crease forming between her brows. Something about the figure on the porch, the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the way he didn't fidget, set her nerves on edge. "Clara," Ruth called softly, her voice unusually tight. "Come here a minute." Clara set her mug down and stepped into the foyer, her eyes narrowing when she saw the envelope in Ruth's hands. Heavy, cream-colored, with a wax seal she didn't recognize. "Who's it from?" she asked. Ruth hesitated, her fingers trembling as they held out the letter. "It's from the Kingsley family." Clara blinked. That name rang bells old, echoing ones. Her father had spoken of them once. Wealthy, untouchable, dangerous. "Open it," Ruth whispered. The seal cracked with a reluctant sound. Clara unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words once, then again, and a third time, because the words didn't make sense. They couldn't be real. Her breath hitched. Is this some kind of mistake? But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Her father, Thomas Thompson, had taken a loan nearly 20 years ago, a desperate loan, when the shop was going under and the hospital bills were piling up. He had always said he paid it off. He had lied. The letter was clear. The original agreement stated that should the debt go unpaid, a personal guarantee would be enforced, and Thomas, in his desperation, had named his daughter as collateral. "No," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "No, this can't be legal. It's signed," Ruth said, her voice breaking, "and notarized. He must have thought they'd forget, but they didn't," Clara whispered. "They're calling in the debt now." A second envelope sat beneath the first, marked with the Kingsley crest. Inside was a brief, formal note. Miss Clara Thompson. Per the terms outlined in the contract dated May 3, 2007, and due to non-payment in full, the estate of Thomas Thompson is required to fulfill the personal guarantee listed therein. You are requested to appear at Kingsley Manor on April 10th at 10:00 a.m. for the formal proceedings. Please be advised that non-compliance may result in legal escalation. E.K. E.K. Clara frowned. That must be Elias Kingsley. Ruth nodded, lips pale. They say he's heartless now, ever since. She didn't finish the sentence. Clara walked back to the kitchen and sat down slowly, her hand still holding the paper that now felt heavier than lead. The chair creaked under her, a familiar sound in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The walls of the house that once felt safe now felt like they were closing in. I can't just go, Clara said. They can't make me marry someone. No, Ruth said quietly, but they can take everything else. The house, the car, my pension. Your father left us nothing but this. Clara clenched her jaw. There had to be a way out. There had to be someone she could call, some lawyer who could overturn it. But she knew better. The Kingsleys didn't make threats. They made arrangements, and the world seldom questioned them. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, counting each creak and groan of the house as if it might anchor her to reality. But by morning, reality had arrived in the form of a black SUV pulling up to the curb. Elias Kingsley didn't knock. He stood on the porch with the kind of authority that didn't need introductions. Tall, dressed in slate gray, and with eyes so pale they seemed carved from winter itself. He looked at Clara like he was measuring a painting an asset to be valued, not a person to be known. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice like gravel smoothed by silk. You've read the letter? Clara stood tall, despite the storm raging in her chest. I did. Doesn't mean I agree. A contract is a contract. Your father's signature is binding, even if he's gone, especially if he's gone. Clara narrowed her eyes. And what exactly are you getting out of this, a wife who didn't choose you? Elias tilted his head slightly, the shadow of something amusement pain passing through his expression. I'm not looking for choice, he said. Just compliance. He handed her another envelope. Inside was a plane ticket, a schedule, a pre-signed marriage license. You have 48 hours, he said. Use them wisely. He turned and walked away, not sparing her or Ruth another glance. And, just like that, Clara's life no longer belonged to her. Elias Kingsley didn't believe in fate. He believed in structure, in silence, in walls built so high that nothing from the outside could touch what remained inside. He had spent the last 12 years mastering the art of emotional invisibility, never too warm, never too cold, just enough civility to keep the world at bay. Kingsley Manor stood as proof of that discipline, perched atop a ridge just outside Ashwood County. The estate was more fortress than home. Acres of pine trees muffled sound from the highway below, and every window reflected the sky, like mirrors never letting the inside be seen. At 39, Elias had built his empire with the same precision he used to arrange his cutlery, everything in place, everything with purpose. His wealth wasn't inherited. It was constructed brick by brick, deal by deal. And yet, no amount of earnings had silenced the echoes of a betrayal that still haunted his every step. Lillian Hart, her name, even now, felt like broken glass beneath his skin. She had entered his life like a spring storm soft at first, with eyes full of admiration and a voice like velvet. But when she left, she took more than his heart. She took trust. She took pieces of him he hadn't realized were so easily lost. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in 7 years. So, when the contract resurfaced, the one buried in the legal ashes of his old dealings with Thomas Thompson, Elias didn't hesitate. He activated it, not because he needed a wife, certainly not for companionship. He did it because order required closure, and Thomas had died without paying what was owed. That morning, after leaving Clara Thompson's house, Elias returned to his study with a glass of scotch and a quiet mind. The girl had stood her ground, he noted. There was something in her gaze, not defiance exactly, but strength, the kind that didn't need volume, the kind that didn't flinch. It irritated him. He didn't want strength. He wanted silence, simplicity. But then she hadn't cried. Not once. Not even when her voice cracked. He sat in the leather chair that faced the fireplace, though no fire burned today. On the desk beside him sat a framed photograph he kept turned face down. He didn't look at it. He never did. Instead, he pulled out the contract again. Thomas's signature was as wild and desperate as Elias remembered. Next to it, a smaller, neater one, Clara's birth record, folded in with the original documents. She had been 10 when it was signed. 10. For a brief second, he felt something, an old flicker of guilt. Maybe, but he snuffed it out like a match. This wasn't about Clara. It was about the debt. Still, that night, he couldn't sleep. Clara arrived at Kingsley Manor 2 days later. The town car pulled up just as the morning fog began to lift, and she stepped out with a single suitcase and eyes that scanned the manor like it was a painting she wasn't sure she liked. Elias watched from the upper landing. She was dressed plainly jeans, a navy coat, a cream scarf wrapped around her neck. No makeup, no performance, just presence. She looked up and saw him. Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long. Downstairs, he greeted her with formality. "Miss Thompson, Mr. Kingsley, welcome." "If that's what this is," she replied, not unkindly. He gestured toward the marble staircase. "Rosa will show you to your room. We'll discuss logistics after lunch." "No need for small talk," she asked. "I find it wastes time." She followed Rosa, their footsteps echoing like soft questions along the corridor. Elias stood still until the sound faded. In his study, he reread the clause that made this arrangement possible, the one that allowed for a non-romantic, legally binding union in the event of default. No intimacy required, no affection expected. Just a transaction. Simple, neat, except Clara wasn't simple. She wasn't loud, but she filled the room somehow. Her silence wasn't submission, it was observation. She wasn't there to argue, but she wasn't folding either. He found that troubling. Lunch was served in the dining room that could seat 20, though only 2 places were set. Clara took her seat quietly. Elias noticed the way she held her fork delicately, but with control. She didn't ask about the food. She didn't ask about the house. She just looked out the window between bites, as if counting the trees. After a few minutes, she spoke. "Why me?" He didn't answer at first. She tried again. "You could have let it go. No one would have blamed you." "That's not how debt works," he said flatly. "No," she replied, "but that's how mercy does. The words sat heavy between them. "I'm not merciful, Miss Thompson. I'm startin' to see that." He met her gaze. She didn't flinch. Elias picked up his wine glass and studied the deep red swirl. "You think I'm cruel. I think you're grieving, just differently." The silence stretched. "You don't know me," he said finally. "Not yet," she answered. That night, Elias stood by the window of his study as moonlight poured like silver across the hardwood floor. He watched Clara cross the lawn, her coat pulled tight against the wind. She paused under the old elm tree near the greenhouse, then tilted her head back to look at the stars. She didn't belong here, and yet she stood like she did. For the first time in years, Elias felt something shift, not warmth, not attraction, a question. What if this woman, this stranger, was not another problem to be solved, but the one mirror that wouldn't break when he finally looked into it? Kingsley Manor was a place where sound didn't linger. It was too large, too pristine, too carefully designed to let anything echo for long. The walls were thick, the windows sealed, the ceiling stretched so high they seemed to hush even footsteps. Clara noticed it her first full day there. How even the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway sounded muted. How the sun filtered through the glass not to warm the room, but only to light it. There was no warmth here, not in the colors, not in the air, not in him. Elias had disappeared into his study after their brief lunch, re-emerging only for dinner, which was served promptly at 7. Rosa, the housekeeper, escorted Clara to the dining room, where she found the table set again for two, far apart at opposite ends. She considered the absurdity of the space. 20 feet of polished mahogany between 2 plates of roast chicken and rosemary potatoes. When Elias entered, he didn't say hello. He simply nodded, took his seat, and began eating. For several minutes, only the sound of silverware broke the silence. "I hope you don't expect me to live like a ghost," Clara said finally, her tone even, but pointed. Elias looked up, surprised. "Excuse me? You haven't asked where I'd like to set up my things. You haven't told me what your expectations are. You haven't even asked if I'm allergic to anything. You just placed me in a room and vanished. I assumed you preferred space. Space is not the same as isolation." He set his fork down, wiped his mouth slowly. "Clara, this isn't a traditional arrangement. I thought we were clear on that." She nodded. "We are, but that doesn't mean I have to disappear into the walls." Elias studied her, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. "No," he said at last, "I suppose it doesn't." She didn't press him further, but that night, in her room, lavish, pale, and cold, Clara sat by the bay window wrapped in an oversized sweater and wrote in her sketchbook. Not words, just lines, loops of charcoal that spilled across the page, too abstract to name, but full of feeling. She missed her old life, her students, the hum of chatter, and the mess of paint-splattered desks. She missed knowing where she belonged. But Clara was not a woman who gave up easily. She was raised to believe that even the coldest winters ended eventually, and sometimes the hardest soil yielded the richest bloom. The next morning brought a thick fog, blanketing the grounds like a veil. Clara wandered downstairs in search of coffee, barefoot, her flannel pajama pants trailing slightly on the polished floor. She found the kitchen empty, but a cup had been left on the counter, still warm, still steaming. A small note rested beside it. 2 sugars, no cream. Our Clara smiled faintly. Rosa had been paying attention. As she sipped, the back door creaked. Elias stepped in, hair damp from morning dew, sleeves rolled up. He looked surprised to see her. "Early riser?" he asked. She nodded. "Coffee helps." He didn't smile, but there was something gentler in his expression. He moved to pour himself a cup. "Do you always patrol the grounds before sunrise?" she asked. "It clears the mind." She tilted her head. Of what he didn't answer right away. "Noise," he said finally. "Memories." Clara nodded, understanding more than she let on. Later that day, Clara explored the manor on her own. Each hallway told a story, the long, arched corridor lined with old oil paintings, none of them labeled. The library, untouched and majestic, with a leather chair worn soft by years of someone's weight, and a small greenhouse on the east side, its glass panels fogged from the humidity inside. She stepped in carefully, inhaling the scent of basil and jasmine. It was the first place that felt alive. That evening, she mentioned it to Rosa. The greenhouse, Rosa said, her voice tinged with affection. That was his mother's place. She used to spend hours in there. Elias keeps it up, though he pretends he doesn't care. Why pretend? Because caring means remembering. Clara thought about that for a long time. The third dinner was quieter, but not as cold. Elias asked a question. "How long have you taught art?" 7 years, Clara replied. "I loved it. Still do." He nodded, sipping his wine. "You must miss your students." "I do. They never judged the world. They just painted it." There was a pause, a shift in air. "You don't talk much about yourself," he said. Clara smiled. "I haven't had many invitations." He looked like he wanted to respond, but didn't. The next afternoon, Clara found herself sitting on a bench in the courtyard, sketching the bare branches of a dogwood tree. Elias approached, not with intention, but with curiosity. "You draw every day most days. It helps me understand things I can't say out loud." He glanced at the page. "You're talented." Clara looked up, slightly surprised. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, almost without meaning to, "You remind me of someone." She turned to him, her voice soft. "Who?" He looked away. "Someone I lost." Clara didn't press. Instead, she said, "You seem like someone who has a lot he hasn't said." Elias's jaw tightened. Silence is safer. For who he didn't answer. That night, Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She could feel something shifting, not in the house, but in him, like a room locked for years that someone had just cracked open. But she also knew walls like his didn't fall with kindness alone. They crumbled with truth, and sometimes with pain. The snow had melted early that year. By mid-April, the garden behind Kingsley Manor had begun to stir buds, nudging their way into light, the air filled with the earthy scent of thawing ground. Clara stood by the greenhouse one morning, gently watering a row of basil seedlings. The glass overhead caught the sunlight, casting rippled shadows across her arms. Inside the house, silence still ruled, but something had changed. Elias no longer vanished after dinner. They had begun sharing breakfast, still quiet, but not cold. He asked about her drawings. She asked about his walks. Neither said much, but what they did say began to carry weight. It was almost peaceful, until the past came knocking. Rosa found her first at the front door, standing with the poise of someone who believed the world owed her nothing less than awe. Lillian Hart. She hadn't aged poorly. Her hair was still perfectly styled, her clothes tailored within an inch of perfection. But there was a sharpness in her eyes now, a practiced vulnerability that fooled only those who hadn't met her before. "I'm here to see Elias," she said, voice like warm honey laced with poison. "I'm afraid Mr. Kingsley didn't mention an appointment," Rosa replied, polite but firm. "Oh, Rosa?" Lillian smiled, stepping forward uninvited. "We both know I never needed an appointment." The click of her heels on the marble echoed through the foyer like a memory returned. Clara stepped out of the reading room just in time to see her. The woman paused mid-step, taking in the unfamiliar presence. "And you are Lillian?" asked, eyes scanning Clara from head to toe. "Clara Thompson," Clara said calmly. "And you history," Lillian replied, smiling tightly. Just then, Elias entered the hall. He froze, his gaze locked on Lillian, and, for a moment, the air between them thickened memories, flooding in like a tidal wave. "What are you doing here?" Elias asked, his voice dangerously low. Lillian's demeanor softened instantly. "I needed to see you. Please, it's been so long." "You don't belong here," he said. "I made a mistake. Elias, I see that now." He didn't answer. Clara could see the battle behind his eyes. Anger, confusion, something darker. "You're married now," Lillian gestured toward Clara with disbelief. "I am," Elias said, his voice flat. To her, Lillian scoffed. "She looks like a school teacher." "I was," Clara said, "until your name showed up in a contract." That shut Lillian up for a second. Her eyes narrowed. "So, this is a business deal." Clara didn't reply. She didn't need to. Elias turned to Rosa. "Please show Miss Hart to the guest lounge. I'll speak with her briefly." Clara watched them disappear down the hall, her heart thudding not with jealousy, but with dread. Something told her this ghost wasn't just passing through. The conversation behind closed doors didn't last long. When Elias returned, his face was unreadable. "She's leaving tomorrow," he said simply. Clara nodded. "Why did you let her in?" "Because sometimes," he said, "you have to face what broke you to know if you're still broken." She didn't press, but later that night she found him in the greenhouse, standing motionless among the herbs. Was she the one, Clara asked quietly. Elias didn't look at her. "She was the mistake I kept making." "What did she do?" He hesitated. "She convinced me love was control, that vulnerability was weakness, and I believed her until the day she took everything she could and left." "That's not love," Clara said. "No," Elias agreed. "But it was all I knew." The next morning, Lillian was still in the lounge, flipping through a magazine as if she owned the place. Clara approached her with calm resolve. "Leaving soon?" she asked. Lillian looked up, smiling falsely. "We'll see." Clara took a seat opposite her. "I know what this looks like," Lillian said. "You think I'm here to destroy something?" "I'm not." "Then what are you here for closure?" Lillian said sweetly. "Elias and I were more than a fling. We were meant to be. You were cruel to him. I was honest." Clara studied her. "There's a difference between honesty and cruelty." Lillian leaned forward. Do you really think you're the first to fall for his broken charm? You're just convenient. Clara, a warm body in a cold house. Clara didn't flinch. I'd rather be honest and inconvenient than hollow and polished. She stood to leave. Goodbye. Miss Hart, later that evening, Elias found Clara in the library. She was curled up in a chair, reading a worn paperback. "She's gone," he said. Clara nodded. "Good." He hesitated at the doorway. "You handled her well. I've dealt with shadows before." He walked closer. "I don't want shadows between us." "Then don't create them," she said softly. He exhaled, sitting across from her. "She was my past, Clara, but she no longer defines me." "You say that," Clara replied, closing the book. "But do you believe it?" He didn't answer right away. "I'm learning." They sat in silence, but this time it was the kind that carried warmth, not distance. Spring deepened its hold on the estate. The trees, once bare and hesitant, now reached toward the sun with boldness. The air smelled like new beginnings, though inside Kingsley Manor, change was quieter, more cautious, like a door left slightly ajar, unsure if it should be opened fully. Elias had begun lingering after dinner. It wasn't anything dramatic. He didn't tell stories or make jokes, but he stayed. And when Clara asked about the estate's old oil paintings, he answered. When she laughed softly, not expecting him to notice, he did. One morning, over coffee, Clara found herself asking something she hadn't planned. "Do you believe people can really change?" Elias stirred his coffee slowly. "Not easily, but yes." She nodded, watching the steam curl from her cup. "I ask because I'm trying to. I used to know who I was." "You still do," he said quietly. "You're just in a place that wants to make you forget." Clara looked at him, surprised. "That's surprisingly kind. I didn't mean it to be." "Yes, you did," she said, and smiled just slightly. He didn't smile back, but his silence was no longer armor. It was hesitation, maybe even hope. That afternoon, Clara returned to the greenhouse. She brought with her a small tin of charcoal pencils and a fresh sketchbook. The warmth inside the glass walls felt honest, almost like being back in her classroom. She began to draw without thinking, lines blooming into shapes, moments forming from memory, a child's laugh, the curve of a willow tree, her mother's tired hands washing dishes in a too-small kitchen. She didn't notice Elias standing outside until he cleared his throat. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "You didn't." She smiled. "Come in." He hesitated, then stepped inside, his eyes scanning the space as though it held secrets. "I haven't been in here since my mother passed," he said. Clara's smile softened. "I can feel her in here. Everything's still alive." Elias nodded slowly. "She used to talk to the plants, said they listened better than people. I think they do." He glanced at her sketchbook. "May I?" Clara hesitated, then turned it toward him. He flipped slowly through the pages, portraits of children, trees in various stages of bloom, glimpses of rooms filled with quiet love. "These are beautiful," he said simply. "They're just sketches. They're more than that. They see things others don't." Clara looked at him, then not just looked, but saw him. "Is that why you hide?" she asked gently. "Because being seen means being known." Elias closed the sketchbook carefully, as if afraid to crease the truth. "People leave when you let them in," he said. "Or they stay because you do," she countered. He met her gaze, and for once he didn't look away. Over the next few days, small moments began to weave something quiet but meaningful between them. Elias brought her tea in the evening, always just how she liked it, 2 sugars, no cream. Clara left a bookmark in one of the library books she knew he was reading, a pressed daisy tucked between the pages. They didn't talk about what was happening, they just let it. But there were moments when the silence broke and the truths beneath came spilling out. One evening, Clara found Elias on the back porch, staring at the horizon as dusk painted the sky in muted golds and blues. She sat beside him, waiting. "My father used to sit here," he said eventually. "He taught me everything about power, how to keep it, how to fear losing it." "Did he teach you how to love?" Clara asked. Elias let out a breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "No. He said love was a weakness that made men fools." Clara rested her hands in her lap. Then maybe he was afraid. He was of dying, of being forgotten. "And you," Elias looked at her, the fading light casting soft shadows across his face. "I'm afraid of not knowing what's real." Clara reached over, not to take his hand, but to place hers beside it, close enough to feel the warmth. "You're not the only one." That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He walked the halls of Kingsley Manor like a ghost retracing his own footsteps. In the library, he found the sketch Clara had left behind, a half-finished drawing of the manor's south window, sunlight bending through it like hope. It wasn't perfect. It was raw, alive, and it moved him in a way he couldn't explain. The next morning, Clara woke to find a small note tucked beneath her breakfast plate. "Meet me at the greenhouse. Noon." She arrived on time, half curious, half nervous. Elias was waiting inside, holding something wrapped in linen cloth. "I thought it was time I shared something," he said. He unwrapped the bundle, slowly revealing a small wooden box, worn but beautifully carved. "My mother's journal," he explained. "I found it after she passed. I've never shown it to anyone." Clara opened it carefully. Inside were pressed flowers, hand-drawn sketches, and pages of flowing script, notes about planting, healing herbs, thoughts on life and loss. She believed in softness, Elias said. "In growing things." "She would have liked you," Clara whispered. "She would have loved you," he replied, almost too softly to hear. Clara looked up at him, eyes wide. And just like that, one of the cracks in the wall turned into a door. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment, the skies were pale and gentle. The next, they darkened like spilled ink across parchment. By mid-afternoon, thunder was grumbling low in the distance, and the air tasted of electricity and memory. Clara stood by the library window, watching the trees bend and shudder under the weight of approaching wind. Rain was falling in sheets now, blurring the edges of the world outside. She should have felt safe in a house so grand, so thick-walled, but something in the air made her skin crawl. Rosa had left early that day. Her sister had taken ill, and Clara insisted she go. Elias was downtown at a board meeting, not expected back until evening. The manor, for all its size, felt suddenly too quiet, too still. Clara moved from room to room, trying to shake the unease. She lit a few candles, read half a page, made herself a cup of chamomile tea. Still, the sense of being watched clung to her like static. It was just nerves, she told herself. until she heard the glass shatter. She froze. It came from the east corridor, one of the sitting rooms rarely used. The sound was unmistakable, the sharp, cruel music of something breaking. Clara set down her cup, heart pounding. She moved cautiously, her feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floors. As she reached the hall, she paused. The room ahead glowed faintly lamplight. Maybe, but no one was supposed to be home. No one. She stepped closer, and that's when she saw her. Lillian Hart, soaked to the bone, mascara streaked, fury dancing in her eyes like lightning behind clouds. "You really thought you won," she hissed. Clara stood her ground. "What are you doing here?" Lillian's laugh was unhinged, wild. "Elias didn't tell you I still have access. Keys, codes." He changed the locks once, then changed them back. "You broke in?" Lillian waved her off. "You don't get it. You're not the first. You're not the last." Clara's voice remained steady, but her fingers curled tightly at her sides. "Leave. You think he loves you." Lillian stepped forward, her heels slipping slightly on the wet floor. "You're just the quiet between his storms." "No," Clara said firmly. "I'm the calm after yours." Lillian's hand shot out, knocking a vase from the mantel. It shattered into 100 glittering pieces. Clara didn't move. "You should go before you add police records to your resume." "Don't test me." But just then, a second voice cut through the hallway. "I think you've done enough damage for one lifetime. Elias." He stood at the end of the corridor, rain clinging to his coat, hair dripping, eyes full of something Clara couldn't name: rage. Yes, but also fear. "Get out," he said to Lillian. Her eyes widened, lips parting. "You're choosing her. After everything we had, you never gave me anything real." He said. She did. Lillian trembled, then turned sharply and stormed past them, out the front door, vanishing into the storm she'd arrived with. Silence followed. Elias stepped forward. "Are you okay?" Clara nodded, but the tremor in her shoulders betrayed her. She was waiting inside. She knew how to get in. Elias's hands clenched. "I should have changed everything. I should have—" "You didn't know. I should have protected you." "You did," she said quietly. "You came back." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him cracked. "I was terrified I'd lose you before I even let myself want you." Clara stepped toward him. "Then stop pretending you don't." He didn't answer, not with words, but with movement. Elias reached out slowly, cupping her face as if afraid she'd vanish. His thumb traced a raindrop that had fallen from his own skin to hers. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, "to feel this." "Then we'll learn together," she replied. And he kissed her, not with hunger, not with dominance, but with need, with the desperate softness of a man who hadn't touched joy in years, and a woman who hadn't trusted anyone in just as long. That night, the storm raged louder than ever, but inside the manor, warmth bloomed. They sat together by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, not speaking much, just breathing, letting time pass like waves against the shore. Elias held her hand the entire time. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. In the quiet, something unspoken settled between them, not a promise, not yet, but a beginning, a choice. In the early hours of morning, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She stepped into the kitchen for water, only to find Elias already there, shirt untucked, staring out the rain-speckled window. "You okay?" she asked. He turned. "You should be asking yourself that." Clara walked to him. "I'm fine. Just shaken." "I never wanted this for you," he said. She smiled. "Then let's want something new." Elias looked at her, wonder and disbelief mingling in his eyes. "Why aren't you running?" "Because for the first time in a long time," she said softly, "I don't want to." Morning arrived slowly after the storm. The air outside was thick with dew, and a hush blanketed Kingsley Manor as if the house itself needed rest. The broken vase had been cleared, the door locks were changed, but remnants of the night before still hung in the corners of Clara's chest, like cobwebs spun from doubt. She sat at the breakfast table, her tea growing cold. Across from her, Elias stared at his untouched toast. Neither had said much since waking. Something had shifted between them, and though it wasn't unwelcome, it was delicate. A new layer of closeness, raw and exposed. The silence that morning was not the same silence they once shared. This one was full of unspoken feelings, fragile, uncertain, real. Elias was the first to break it. "I've never let anyone stay this long." Clara looked up. "Because they didn't want to? Because I didn't?" He paused, his eyes finding hers. "But you're still here, and I don't know what to do with that." Clara folded her hands gently. "You don't have to do anything." "I do," he said, "because I want you to stay, and that scares me." She gave him a soft, sad smile. "It scares me, too." Later that afternoon, Clara wandered into the garden alone. The storm had left petals strewn across the gravel, tiny bursts of color against the gray. She knelt beside the roses, brushing fallen leaves away from the soil. "You're stronger than you look," she whispered to one of the blooms. "You all are." Behind her, footsteps crunched lightly. "I always thought they were fragile," Elias said. "They bend," Clara replied, "but they don't break." He nodded, kneeling beside her. "I'm sorry about last night," he said, "for letting her get that close, for not keeping you safe." "You did keep me safe," she answered. "But, Elias, this isn't about what Lillian did. It's about what we're building, and whether we're brave enough to trust it." He looked at her, his jaw tense. "What if I'm not?" Clara reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then we start small, a little each day." That evening, Elias sat alone in the study. He held his mother's journal again, flipping through her neat handwriting, her drawings of root systems and moon phases and herbal tinctures. She had believed in healing, in restoration, even in herself when others didn't. He remembered her voice once saying, "Don't let one wound define your whole skin." But hadn't he? Elias glanced toward the door, then back at the journal, and suddenly he was no longer afraid of what it meant to feel again. Upstairs, Clara stood in front of the mirror in her room. She didn't recognize the woman looking back, this version of herself who was still afraid, but no longer running, who had stopped asking for permission to feel. Her life had changed, not with violence, not even with love, but with presence, with staying. That night, they met again in the kitchen, both restless, both too full of thought to sleep. Elias poured tea. Clara brought a blanket. They sat on the floor like two kids hiding from the world. "I used to think love looked like chaos," he said. "Big gestures, wild declarations. things that made your heart race. And now Clara asked, "I think love might look like this." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Me too." Summer came quietly to Ashwood County, as if not wanting to startle the delicate peace that had settled over Kingsley Manor. The days grew longer, the gardens fuller. Roses bloomed where once there were only thorns. Clara's sketchbook grew thick with memories. The halls of the house once filled with cold and silence now carried laughter, footsteps, the murmur of soft conversation over morning coffee. Elias changed, too. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like soil softening after frost. He started joining Clara in the kitchen to cook. He began reading poetry, never aloud, but she'd find his books open, pages dog-eared. He no longer walked the halls alone at night. He walked with her. One evening, they sat on the back porch watching fireflies dance across the lawn. Clara sipped wine from a mason jar, her bare feet tucked beneath her. "I used to dream of a big wedding," she said. Church bells, lace, too many flowers. Elias glanced at her, one brow raised. She smiled. Funny how none of that mattered. He nodded. "What matters now?" Clara turned to face him. "That it's real." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "I don't have the words," Elias said softly, "but I think I've found the feeling." Clara opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, no stone, no embellishment, just a circle. Endless, eternal. "I don't want a contract anymore," he said. "I want a choice." Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I haven't asked yet," he said, smiling faintly. "You don't have to." But he did anyway. "Clara Thompson, will you marry me again, not because of debt or duty, but because you are the only thing I have ever been certain of?" She laughed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." The second wedding was nothing like the first. There were no lawyers, no heavy silence, just light, warmth, and people who mattered. Rosa officiated, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Elias stood with Vincent, his oldest friend, and legal counsel by his side. Clara's mother, Ruth, held a bouquet of wildflowers, smiling with quiet pride. The ceremony took place in the greenhouse, where love had first bloomed. Elias wore a soft gray suit. Clara, a dress she'd sewn herself, ivory linen with embroidered vines along the hem. Her hair was pinned back with rosemary and baby's breath. There were no grand declarations, just truth. "I vow," Elias said, "to be your peace, not your storm." "And I vow," Clara replied, "to be your home, not your burden." They kissed, gentle and sure, and the guests few, but full of heart, rose to their feet in applause. Later, at dusk, Clara and Elias danced alone in the library. No music played, just the sound of wind through the open windows and the soft rhythm of their breath. "Do you regret it?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How we started!" Elias looked at her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "No," he said, "because it brought me you." She smiled, pressing her cheek to his chest. "And you, my love," he whispered, "are worth every broken piece it took to find something whole." In the months that followed, the manor transformed, not just in structure, but in spirit. Clara opened a small art studio in town. Children came after school, their laughter echoing down the streets. Elias, now a silent partner in her dream, often visited sometimes with snacks, sometimes just to sit and watch. People began to speak differently about Elias Kingsley, not as the ruthless billionaire, but as the man who had been quiet too long and finally found his voice. They never talked much about the past. It wasn't ignored. It simply didn't hold them hostage anymore, because every morning when Clara reached for Elias across the sheets, and every night when he whispered good night against her hair, they chose again and again and again, because in the end, love wasn't just about grand gestures. It was about staying through storms and silence, through pain and fear, through broken promises and new beginnings. And sometimes, just sometimes, love could begin in the most unlikely place and grow roots deeper than anyone ever thought possible. Sometimes life places us in situations we never chose, tied to the past, bound by choices made by others. But even in those moments, we are not powerless. What we do next is ours to decide. Clara and Elias's story reminds us that healing doesn't always come with grand gestures. Often, it begins in silence, in staying, listening, and choosing to see beyond someone's walls. Trust, when broken, can be rebuilt not all at once, but gently, with patience and truth. For those of us who've lived long enough to carry both love and regret, this story is a quiet whisper. It's never too late to begin again. Even after loss, even after betrayal, love, real love, may not always knock loudly. It may arrive in the quiet, in a hand held, in a vow rewritten from the heart. And if we're willing to stay, not to fix someone, but to see them, we may just find that the most beautiful connections are born not from perfection, but from courage. Thank you for spending your time with us and for opening your heart to this story. If it touched something deep within you, if you saw a part of yourself in Clara or Elias, we'd be truly grateful if you'd let us know. Please share this story with someone who might need it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt journeys that speak to the quiet corners of the soul. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to feel seen